Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last of the Crosstalk Digitalization series for 2021. First of all, I want to thank our episode sponsor, Optel Group, for making this event possible. I also like to thank our event partners, Inveritas and Sustainable Harvest. And also, I would like to thank the two moderators, Dr. Tomoko Yokoi of IMD, and also Dr. Sarah Tischer of NKG. So today, we are all in for a very special treat. We have a great topic, traceability. We have also global speakers and excellent panel of coffee leaders and experts who will help us navigate the issues and challenges that we all face as an industry. Let's go over the agenda for today so that we know the direction of travel. So we will have a keynote, inspirational talk, and two panels. And essentially, they will discuss about building trust through traceability and shaping the future of traceability. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our keynote today. David Browning is the CEO of Inveritas, a nonprofit organization that provides sustainability assurance for the coffee industry. Just like with the other speakers, we will publish his bio on our Speakers Bureau on our website. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our keynote today, David Browning of Inveritas.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Joe, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. And I'd like to thank WCA for hosting this event. When we think of traceability and transparency, we tend to think of physical movement of coffee through the supply chain. But there are other transparency and traceability issues that need to be accounted for, such as deforestation detection. And today I'd like to share with you some important digital innovations that have been happening in this space. Deforestation has been important for coffee supply chain assurance for a long time, but there's a much greater sense of urgency today due to momentum around climate change. In 2005, the Kyoto Protocol came to being. This represented the first internationally legally binding climate treaty. In 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed. And since then, almost every nation, I think 197 countries, have endorsed the agreement to reduce emissions and reach global net zero by the second half of the century. And in a few days, the international community will come together again to discuss progress since the Paris Agreement and try to push towards more ambitious targets. And this momentum at the global diplomatic level has permeated the private sector, including the coffee industry. Nestle has committed to net zero by 2050, Lavazza by 2030, Blue Bottle by 2024, and Nespresso by 2022, which is only 2 months away. So this is great. We have vision, we have committed leadership, and we have concrete time-bound goals set down on paper. And we're eager to get from here to there. But an important question before we start is, where are we? It's hard to know where to set sail if you can't answer that question. And it's even harder to know if you're heading in the right direction. How much carbon is being emitted by a coffee company today? And if we take action, have carbon emissions been reduced? And how will we know when we get to zero? One of the important potential contributors to company carbon emissions is deforestation. Here is a satellite image from forest in 2017, and here is the same place in 2019. The forest is gone. Was this deforestation captured? Was every event like this all over the world captured? If you think about it, what is behind the deforestation numbers that appear in corporate reports? How are they measured and how accurate are they? Today, I'd like to explain what the traditional approach has been to calculate deforestation, including 6 limitations that historically existed. But I'd also like to share with you new digital tools that promise to give much greater transparency on this issue. And the reason I'm excited is it offers the hope to merge this unprecedented corporate interest in reducing carbon emissions with a better map of where we are and where we're going. So how do we measure deforestation? We primarily use satellite imagery, such as this one, combined with artificial intelligence to analyze the images and detect change. This is the MERIS satellite, which has done remarkable service for science, providing contributions in our understanding of clouds, water vapor, phytoplankton in oceans, and much more. However, there are a few problems with using MERIS to measure deforestation for the coffee industry. The first problem is it's not very granular. It was launched in 2002, nearly 20 years ago. This is an image of the Sydney Opera House using advanced recent satellite imagery at a resolution of 50 by 50 centimeter pixels. This is the Opera House with slightly lower resolution, 5 by 5 meter pixels. The same image at 30 meters. And this is the image with the MERIS satellite, 300 by 300 meter resolution. The Opera House disappears into Sydney Harbour at this resolution. If someone can steal the Sydney Opera House without us knowing, you can see that it probably isn't the best technology to be monitoring deforestation in coffee. And the second problem with using MERIS is that it's now lost in space. We lost contact 10 years ago, so we can't get any updates on the information it provides. So using it as the baseline has some potential challenges because we're not able to update it from the same source in the future. A third problem is that historically we've had to do a lot of extrapolation from satellite data. This is the JEDI satellite track, which is often used for deforestation calculations. It only covers 4% of the land surface, which are the green lines that you can see in this image. And then it has to deduce what the rest of the picture is that it can't see. A fourth problem is the world got very ambitious when we first started talking on this topic about what would be measured, dividing forest up into 4 different categories and then dividing non-forest up into an additional 2 categories for 6 categories in total. So the ambitious approach traditionally taken was to use a few data sources, in this example, the 2 satellites, JEDI and Sentinel-2, and then use that information to predict many variables. So here's an example. I'd like you to focus on the forest around the yellow dot and try to classify it. Is it high density forest? Maybe medium density? Maybe low density? Well, the correct answer is it's not forest at all. It's scrub. And if we make the error of classifying it as high density forest rather than scrub, and it gets cut down, then we've overestimated the deforestation by a factor of 5. Now you might say, okay, but how do you know it's scrub? Maybe your new AI model is wrong too. And that's a great question, and we'll come back to that a little later. A fifth challenge is that we haven't been taking advantage of the significant improvements that occurred in artificial intelligence around 2016. A technological step change occurred around that time that provides much better ability to detect and identify different crops as opposed to just seeing them as trees. But this isn't incorporated into most deforestation models. This the image you're seeing is a commercial palm oil plantation in 2018. This picture is taken in 2019. The plantation has been cut down and replanted. This is not deforestation, this is commercial agriculture. If you look closely in the image, you'd be able to see the new palm trees starting to grow already. But it was incorrectly classified by old AI models as deforestation, which is shown here in pink. So the question is this a big problem or is this a little problem? Does this sort of classification error happen a lot, or is it a rare occurrence? If it's a rare occurrence, then we really don't need to worry about it. But in Sumatra, at least where we've checked, it's a big problem. 75% of the total estimated deforestation in 2019 is probably in error, and primarily from rubber and palm plantations being overestimated. A sixth problem, and the final problem I'll discuss today, is we haven't been ground truthing. So let's go back to our spot in the forest with the yellow dot. It looks like forest from satellite image, but once you get on the ground, it is not. This is a photo north, south, east, and west, straight up on this yellow dot. The height, the tree height is less than 5 meters, the definition of forest. So while it looks like forest, it is in fact scrubbed by the definitions the world agrees upon. And this will be even more difficult to classify accurately if we're using low resolution imagery, as we discussed before. This is another example from the coffee industry. This is a place which was classified as forest, was in fact coffee plantation interspersed with pepper. So Enveritas took a different approach. Rather than try to divide into different forests, we've attempted to answer less questions more accurately. Is it forest or not forest? And using a variety of different data sources, including ground truthing. We've taken advantage of more recent satellite imagery that can provide far greater coverage of the Earth's surface than was traditionally possible. And while traditional AI models can easily detect crops such as palm or maize, which are easily distinguishable, determining forest from what is not forest in commercial crops has been far more challenging. But we built more accurate AI models that can do this and provide far greater supply chain transparency. To get a sense of what a significant step this represents, have a look at these images and attempt to classify which ones are forest, which ones are rubber, and which are commercial cocoa. And you can see the challenge. These are the actual answers. And this dramatically improved predictive model is also able to identify real deforestation that is happening, that is occurring. This is deforestation occurring on the edge of a national park. And this is coffee that's being planted amongst the burnt remains. So to give you a sense of how this can have real world application, this is Bukit Barisan, a national park in Indonesia. It's home to about 40 or 50 Sumatran tigers, which are a critically endangered subspecies. Every year, forest inside the park is cut down, and in some places, it's being replaced by coffee. But where and how often? Here is a map of Sumatra. The national park Bukit Barisan is located in the south of Sumatra. And the national park boundaries and the interior of the park are shown here in green. And here you can see the specific deforestation events that are occurring up in the north part of the park this year, specifically between January 1st and September 30th of this year. And if you'd like to ask the question, well, is it possible to get digital traceability in even more real time? This is an example of deforestation that happened just 2 weeks ago. And that deforestation is likely to be happening as we speak today. A lot of innovation has been happening in digital traceability in the past 3 years, and we're only just getting started. Thanks for your time. I hope you enjoy the other speakers and the panelists. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, David. So let me introduce our inspirational speaker. Louis Roy is the President, CEO, and founder of Optel Group, a B Corp and the world's largest supplier of traceability solutions. An ambassador of corporate social environmental responsibility, Louis is very often invited to share his vision at international conferences, including meetings as part of the World Economic Forum's Sustainable Development Impact Summit. We will also publish his full bio on our website. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our inspirational speaker for today, Louis Roy, CEO, President, and founder of Optel. Over to you, Louis.
Thank you, Joseph. I really appreciate being here. And Joseph, for this event, has asked me to talk about a transforming moment. We know that the coffee industry is heading toward a major transforming moment that I think it's now. So let's get started by what happened. Why am I here? Why am I talking here? So it started a long time ago. It started in 1989 when I was doing my master in physics. When I looked for a job and I said, okay, what do I want to do? I come from a family that work in international development, so I had always this desire to make an impact. So I decided, with no money, no idea, nothing, to start a business. And the idea is to impact the world. Being in a business and build big corporations that are global, it's a good place to start. Because when you look around you, all the world, all the things you have around you come from businesses. So that was the main idea at the beginning in 1989. So thanks to technology, we were able to become a leader in some of the first industrial vision system, including AI. And then in 2010, we had this opportunity in the pharmaceutical industry to solve one of their critical issues, which was the supply chain, counterfeit medicine, and monitoring the flow of medicine and inventory along up to the patient. So we were well positioned at this time in the pharmaceutical industry. And then we started from 2010 to 2017 to focus our energy on that. So we thought, wow, it's a big impact. We can help save life, make sure that the medication people take are the right one. They respected the temperature, they have the right effect. So by 2017, we became the world leader in digital traceability in the pharmaceutical space. But then I came back to my initial mission, which is to have an impact. And yes, we do have an impact on pharmaceutical supply chain, healthcare supply chain. We're solving big issues. But then when you take a step back and you look where the world is going, everything can be destroyed by climate change, by water scarcity, and mineral resources around the world, natural resource management. So we want to be an impact company. We are a B Corp. So that was a really transforming moment to take a step back and look, yes, I have a good business. We have good process in place. We have good customer and people like our product, but the world is changing and everything we are doing could be in danger of being completely disrupted because of external factor that we think was external factor like climate change, water availability, and natural resource. So from 2017, we decided to put in place an ambitious plan to, get the world back into the planetary boundaries. And traceability, as you will see during this panel, is key for that. So at Optel, we were in a good position in 2017, so we invest all our profit. So we are a B Corp. I'm the owner of Optel. We control our own destiny. So that was huge transformation for Optel. Say, okay, now we're going toward solving, a different supply chain, trying to have a generic platform that can monitor the flow of any physical good, measure its environmental and social impact, securing it to avoid illegal insertion, and then bring this to the manufacturing site securely, and then follow the product and share the story. So it is building visibility for the different stakeholders and then building transparency, because we need now to reach this transparency level, because more and more people will get stressed about climate change, but they will want to know, okay, what's my impact? What can I do? So this was a transforming moment in 2017. I think now the coffee industry has been facing a lot of pressure lately. You saw the climate change disrupting the yield of the coffee supply chain. We saw the consumer pressure to get more and more info about the product, but now people will become more and more skeptic about the greenwashing. Okay, now show me that I can trust what you do. And it's not only my own certification that I'm showing to you without third-party verification. So this transforming moment for all of you in the coffee supply chain will require you to transform, will require you to look at different way of doing stuff. How will you help your stakeholder not only to get the best price, but you need to make sure that it will be resilient to the climate change, because otherwise it will impact you. So more and more it's the time for collaboration, working together. You're going to need to help the farmer. You're going to need to optimize your distribution. You're going to need to them share the story and convince customer that you are doing the right stuff. Of course, I consider that human, when they are in a problematic situation, I would not say that word here, human have the capacity to innovate. So now it's really the time for the next 10 years, we'll need to put innovation and accept transformation to adapt to a new reality and solve the problem, not being part of the problem. Digital technology, as you saw with the satellite imagery now, we can solve a lot of stuff. We can help control your supply chain and make sure now that we're slowly going into the planetary boundaries, but we don't have much time. So we need to act fast. The 10 years coming is going to be very transformative, and it's going to be an important gate for humanity. So traceability, you see, connect the dot. Traceability, you could be able to leverage it to not only solve the problem that we're facing, but also improve your operation. So you got to look now at this transforming moment to get different people from your operation to work together and see how digital transformation will help me not only solve the environmental and social problem, but improve my operation so that the stakeholder, the shareholder can find their good a return on investment on this. But it's going to be challenging. It's going to be never, like in the pharma, when we work in the pharma, never the pharmaceutical the different sector in one company had to work together as this moment. We had to bring the manufacturing, the procurement, the distribution, the logistic together, and the IT to work together to solve this traceability requirement. It's a lot of work, but it is the only way to go forward. We won't do paper-based traceability. So this transforming event is coming. We went through it. It was a rough change in Uptel to come, okay, we're strictly pharma, to be, okay, now we're in multiple supply chain. And when you work in supply chain, you need to be transversal. You need to work at the farm level, you need to work at the mine level, you need to work at the manufacturing level, and then you need to be aware what information the consumer will be asking for. So it was a transforming moment, quite rough, but we're here, stronger than ever, with incredible innovation, and now we feel that it's the time to transform the industry. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Louis. Let's welcome our panel one speakers. Panel one is going to be moderated by Tomoko Yokoi, a researcher and advisor at the Global Center for Digital Business Transformation, IMD Business School in Switzerland. I suppose I will give a little plug here. She is the co-author of the upcoming book, Hacking Digital, Best Practices to Implement and Accelerate Your Business Transformation. So let's welcome Tomoko Yokoi of IMD. I will let Tomoko introduce the panel one speakers to say a quick hello to save time, but we will publish all their photos, bios, and logos on our Speakers Bureau on our website. So over to you, Tomoko.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm delighted to kick off the first of our two panels today that focuses on building trust through traceability. So as many of you know, organizations are realizing the value of traceability because it brings efficiency, cost savings, and perhaps also achieves product premiums in the market. However, a lot of these organizations must first overcome the mistrust associated with validating claims of product identity and traceability. So how does digital play a role in all this? So to discuss this issue today within the context of the coffee industry, we have 5 speakers with us who provide us with different points of view. So first of all, I don't need to introduce you to Louis Hua of Uptel Group, who just provided us with the inspirational keynote. Our second speaker is Deepak Kaul of Olam Food Ingredients. Say hello. Third speaker is Arthur Karuletwa of ACF Family Tree Farms. Say hello to Arthur.
Glad to be here.
Fourth speaker is Carolina Castaneda of the Colombian Coffee Federation, FNC.
Hello.
And we also have Matthew Dax of Bull Cafe Specialty.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
So thanks all of our 5 speakers for being here with us today. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion and even we might even have a little bit of a debate. So without further ado, let's dive straight into the topic by asking our panelists the first question of, how can digital solutions work to build trust? And I think when responding to this particular question, perhaps our audience would like to understand how you define trust. Where is the trust weak or strong in the system today? And then how can digital solutions help to build it? So Matthew, let's kick it off with you.
Great, Tomoko, thank you very much. And again, it is a pleasure to be here with all of these great panelists. Thank you, Joseph and the World Coffee Alliance for putting this all together. I think if we look at where the coffee industry is today versus where the coffee industry was 10 to 15 years ago, we can see that the digitalization of communications and the way that we work has really come a long way. And I think that it's evidence to the fact that digital solutions can continue to help build trust. Again, 15, 20 years ago, the coffee trade, I think that there was a lot of distrust. Buyers who weren't necessarily trusting their import or exporting trade partners, producers who weren't trusting their millers or their exporters, and the digitalization of communications, I think, has come a long way and really helped to bridge that gap. So today, a coffee roaster in Northern California can get on their phone and communicate to a producer in Brazil. They can have a FaceTime chat to speak to their producing partner directly. They can see what's happening in the field. I think this has really come a long way towards bridging that gap for the whole supply chain. And it's really, if we look at how the export and import trades have changed, I think it's really revolutionized the roles that we serve, right? So I sit currently on the import side of the trade, and our function has changed dramatically, I think, from where we were 15 years ago. In the past, as the trade, by default, through no fault of our own, but by default, we were sort of a gatekeeper of information. We were the ones who had a solid network at origin. We were able to talk to agronomists. We could talk to producers about what was happening. And today, we have to transform and be more of a service-oriented business. So yeah, I think if we look at what's happened over the last couple of years, last 10, 15 years, digitalization has really impacted the level of trust in the industry in a very positive way. So I see that continuing.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Carolina, what's your perspective on this?
Thanks, Tomoko. The question couldn't come at a better time for this Crosstalk series, precisely taking into consideration The Economist's front page for this week, Instant Economics. And indeed, here we are talking about the same topic of what trust means in digitalization. In that sense, I'm going to talk on behalf of the Colombian coffee growers. As you know, our brand has been built for decades, and that implies a recognition from the consumer of all the values of Colombian coffee. We need to make sure that when a consumer reaches a supermarket shelf and sees Colombian coffee, it is actually Colombian coffee with all the protection and all the care that comes from our coffee growers in the country. And in that sense, we are delighted to let you know that during the pandemic, our 100% Colombian coffee brands have grown 10% during the pandemic, Why? Because the consumers are working from home and they want that affordable luxury of buying Colombian coffee. And in that sense, what is that trust for us? That trust means traceability, to know where that coffee is coming from, where it is along the supply chain. And there are things that we need to improve right now with the supply chain all over to the supermarkets, including vessel timings, availability of containers, all those components, because we all as a coffee industry depend on them. Connection. That's a very important topic in terms of digitalization. Human connection. Let's not let digitalization make coffee growers become a number. Let's not forget the testimonials, who they are, and how to tell that to the consumers, to the donors, to the partners of our coffee growing regions. To give you an example, this morning I was on meetings about a sustainability project, and we presented videos of the coffee farmers thanking the donor for all that effort. That's the human part of digitalization, and we have to continue working on that regard. The third one is quality assurance all over the supply chain, because if a consumer sees Colombian coffee and tries the coffee and it doesn't meet our attributes, then we would lose a consumer. We have to protect that all over the supply chain. And the fourth point to David's presentation is precisely sustainability. As all of you know, Colombian coffee also means precisely those environmental, social, and economic values, that protection of the environment, assuring prosperity income, assuring that our communities are well. Back to you, Tomoko.
Thank you, Carolina. With that, Arthur, I'd really like to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, that was tough to follow, but thank you. I'm glad to be here. And I absolutely love the human aspect of this whole conversation. But as you all know, we can all appreciate where we're coming from with the erosion of trust at a global level. So this can come at a better time. You know, one of the most valuable aspects to any form of trade is trust. And since attaining trust is a human behavior, we know we always will fall short to a certain extent. So trust is essentially a firm belief in the reliability of someone or something. And since the coffee value chain, in my opinion, is the perfect barometer of trust, primarily due to its multiple dependencies of someone or something to be constantly and reliably delivered, it is imperative that the checks and balances are put in between the multitudes of actors that are out of reach of any potential compromise. So fortunately, digital solutions like traceability are multidimensional, you know, spanning across boundaries and oceans and cultures. And because of this, it's the fastest way to adopt into a multicultural global commodity like coffee and other commodities, of course. Because what is problematic or opportunistic in Rwanda may not be the same in Colombia or Indonesia. And while we also may build platforms that are immutable, we all know that physical coffee is highly mutable. So while there may be some parts of the value chain that are prone to compromise than some, as you move up the value chain into more advanced supply chain management systems, stitching a digital solution across entire value chains will continue to help us alter the economics. Since at a minimum, coffee has to be unloaded and loaded and packed and repacked. So the large scale erosion of trust becomes more discoverable and a little bit more unsustainable. So though there are a number of points in our value chain that have a high level of erosion of trust, what excites me about this movement of digital traceability is its power in amplifying equitable value across the entire process from producer to consumer. Traceability to me is like an image of self and having no choice but accepting what you see in self-reflection. It gives you a glimpse of what your product's journey looks like at arrival, what damage it has, and what relief it's left behind. You know, it's like a turbulent river to me. In Rwanda, where I'm from, we have a saying that a river is named after its mouth's end, after an assessment of its meandering journey and the damage or relief it has left behind. And it's meandered through different communities and smallholder plantations. Some leave floods over year and damage, and others bring much relief of water and nutrients to communities. Either way, a community ends up knowing its destiny. So the coffee supply chain and most commodities like coffee is just as turbulent and as murky. And yes, it does leave some areas better than we found it, and some broken promises have triggered some of the worst human atrocities in our lifetime. And so I'm excited to continue to see what see that trust is at the core of a robust traceability platform. So back to you, Tomoko.
Thank you, Arthur. I like the metaphor of the river, and it's a self-reflection. With that, Deepak, we'd love to hear your perspective.
Thanks, Tomoko, and thanks to WCA for organizing this webinar. From my perspective, I think the question of trust, especially as it applies to the context of our coffee industry, is more about the lack of availability of information across the supply chain. I think the fact that somebody's having a cup of coffee in Lausanne is actually drinking coffee which is grown in Rwanda, and that coffee has passed through multiple hands in its journey, and so has the information. So therefore, somebody sitting in Lausanne probably doesn't have the full visibility of what's going on down in Rwanda, for example. So it's a question of information, and possibly that's where digital tools come into the picture and allow us to bridge that information gap by providing real-time and transparent information about where the coffee is grown, what is the situation of the farmers, etc., right down to the consumer sipping that cup of coffee in Lausanne. I think at OFI, Coffee Lens is our strategy to build that traceability and trust and overcome the barriers of information that exist today. We have clearly defined set of goals that we want to deliver in order to improve the sustainability and traceability across the chain. And these goals are built around the UN SDGs and focus on 4 key priority areas for us, which is around economic opportunity, education and skills, climate action, and ecosystem. And our target is to impact 425,000 farmers across our supply chains with this effort, and stitch all of this information together using digital tools like OFIS, Olam Direct, and AtSource in order to deliver that information right down the supply chain. So back to you, Tomoko.
Thanks so much, Deepak. And Louis, I'd like to hear what you have to say after hearing all these other speakers.
It's very pertinent. So my experience is really about the data capture and then keeping the integrity. So we're in the field, we work in Indonesia, Kenya, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, everywhere around the world. And so you have to make an assumption that is sad, but it's real, it's human. You know, well, most human will try to find a way to, you know, take his own benefit. So we see it in some country, there is 50% of fake drug in the legit distribution of medicine. And so we have to put the proper control. And the main weak point is the data capture. How do you enter the data? So we've worked a lot on different models. How do we capture data like in the palm or the coffee from the smallholder? There is tons of smallholders, you know, in the coffee sector. I think the average area field for a smallholder is less than 1 hectare. So there is millions of them. So how do you secure the data from that? So we work with truck drivers that go and from farmer to farmer to capture the information. So a certain level, so we create incentive for that. So how can we trust the data if someone have an advantage to say, oh, okay, no, let's just put this data in and it will be better for us. So there's a big challenge there. In some place we use NGO to validate the data. Now we come with a model that we use third-party auditor that go and validate randomly the data that was input on the platform, either from the truck driver or either from the farmer when it's possible, or let's say the mills or the first transformation point. But it's a big point. The quality of the data that you import is where it starts. And people could be, I think there is a diverted discussion about in blockchain, that blockchain doesn't solve it's just creating immutability of the data. But if you have the wrong data, it's getting there. And in real life, like in my Ivory Coast on the cacao supply chain, the truck sometimes just get jammed. So they needed to be a transportman of the shipment. So sometimes we lose track of shipment. So what do we do in this case? What do we do with the data? Who's gonna correct or make the specific change of the data? But this is a complexity on the smallholder supply chain where you have so many entry points. How do you get the information? How do you make sure that you enter the right information? And then how do you make sure that you control the flow of material? Because everyone will try to insert illegal, not everyone, but many people will try to insert illegal material into the legit supply chain because it's much more expensive. It costs more. So there's more advantage. Same thing in the pharmaceutical supply chain. At the end, putting a vaccine that costs, let's say, $15 each, you put one that is fake that costs 20 cents, but you still make $15 by selling it. So you make a lot of money. So you need to put a supply chain and control in place that avoid those wrongdoing. Otherwise, humanity, especially when you're under stress, people will try to fill the void. So it's not an easy task to build the trust, but there are technology, but there are also stakeholder, like third-party auditor, like we work with Bureau Veritas, that can come and certify that the data was right. So put some control in place.
So, Louis, I'd like you to hold on that thought because I think it comes to the next question we might be talking about. But I'd like to sum up this, how our panelists have answered the question about how can digital be used to build trust. I think with this, our speakers have mentioned a couple of interesting points. They talked about, how digital might be used to bridge the gap. There are gaps that can be defined in many different ways. The roles of different stakeholders. Also about, there was the challenge of brands. How do you verify the brand? I also heard about checks and balances as well. And some other issues that we saw in the system today have also been overcoming the barriers to information. And at the same time, what I also heard from our speakers was that they saw that the word stitching came up quite frequently in many of our speakers' responses. So digital solutions perhaps could be used to stitch and bring together some of these fragmented things that are happening across the industry today. So I thought that was an interesting perspective that everybody seemed to agree on. So with that, I'd like to ask our speakers about the second question, which goes into a little bit more about what Louis had spoken about. And the question is, what are the key challenges in developing a robust and transparent digital traceability system? If you have any observations or experience that you could share with our audience, that would be wonderful. Louis, I think you had just gotten onto that role with our last question. So maybe, Louis, if you could kick it off, that would be great.
Yeah. So I think the first one, when we work with association or brand that want to give this transparency, it's understanding the data that you need and is it achievable? Like in certain case, customer say, okay, I want to have a serialize every bag from the field up to my manufacturing site. Well, when you get 10,000 bags per day for a smallholder, that could be problematic. Do they have access to the technology, etc. So I think you need to adapt your requirement of data to the available technology and the available process within your stakeholder. That is the first one, because if you try to get, I want to map all my coffee smallholder, I want to have all this information, I want to have real-time tracking when they are shipping and when we're receiving. Currently, I think at the moment, the level of industry or what we see in Africa, it's not there yet. it will come, but it's not ready yet. So don't ask for data that will just kill the project. And we've done that a lot with NGO project. Oh yeah, let's capture the data, but it's not sustainable. So make sure you have the right data. It's why, like our experience in the coffee, maybe you should go in an areal traceability, area sector traceability. Make sure that the sector is right, and then track from this sector, not track from the individual smallholder. So this is, I think, the two important points. And then the third one, we talk about that, is the make sure that you can validate the data. But also, I think that the big challenge and key to build a robust supply chain traceability.
Okay, thank you. Deepak, what is your view on some of the challenges?
I think the biggest challenge that we face is the fragmented and complex nature of our supply chain. We have 25 million coffee growers in the world, and most of them are smallholder farmers in developing and least developed countries. In many of these cases, they don't have access to networks, they don't have access to communication technologies, and therefore, like Louise was mentioning, collecting information becomes an extremely challenging task. I think the other big challenge that we face is the nature of our supply chain. You know, these smallholder growers produce small amounts of coffee, and by the time these coffees reach to an aggregation level, it's very difficult to maintain traceability at the grower level. And therefore, as you go down the supply chain, the challenge of maintaining that traceability only compounds and becomes exponential. At OFI, we have a farmer information gathering system called OFIS, and this system has been used in our coffee supply chains to gather crop and farm and social information from farmers that are in our supply chain. I think one of the ways in which we can really mitigate some of these challenges is by collaboration. So as an example, so just taking on from what David was mentioning earlier about the Bukit Barisan National Reserve in Indonesia, we have partnered with the Wildlife Conservation Society and shared our OFIS system with them in order for them to be able to track the farmers that are operating around the boundaries of the Bukit Barisan National Park, so that there is a before and after scenario available where we can track if there was deforestation and therefore find the causes and then initiate remedial actions. Similarly, in Guatemala, there was an issue around child labor, and we used the OFIS data in order to provide and start nurseries for children of the farmer, especially during the peak harvest time when the schools are on holiday, and therefore keep these children in school rather than them being forced to work in the coffee farms during the picking season. So I think the challenges around the fragmented nature of our supply chain and the complexity of the chain, and the way we can mitigate these challenges is by collaboration and using some of these tools that are available and try and sort of bring real information into our systems and pass it down the supply chain. Back to you, Tomoko.
Thank you. Arthur, love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. The challenges are numerous, could probably take this whole session, but I'll focus on the actual systems from a system standpoint. There obviously are a number out there, but the one that truly stands out to me is data sovereignty. Data is slowly and justifiably becoming a key contributor to an incredible value to GDPs in governments in origin countries with a lot of strategic interest. So the accessibility, the control, the distribution of this data that is captured from producer to consumer is now something that is viewed as sovereign information. And so and because of that, we work to build segregated repositories and shared values that have become an uncomfortable reality between peers. And so while working at my former company, we introduced an integrated supply chain using a distributed model where these segregated repositories were able to share data with one another, of course, under permission based guidelines and authentic protocols. But another one I would highlight quickly, as I have a few minutes, is interoperability. And achieving, of course, what we started this conversation with, a more standardized definition of traceability and what that means across the board for everyone. And since we're in the realm of, in the coffee industry, as you begin to see small pockets of hope, collaboration is becoming the new competition. And we need this to achieve a more, standardized protocols and process of how, one, we define traceability and how we move data across peers through a permission-based guideline. And as most companies have their own internal systems or are building their own internal systems, the challenge here is threading the invisible string of technology between each one of these independent systems that will eventually help us tackle the macro challenges that we're facing. This is not only imperative, but our whole industry depends on it. So back to you, Tomoko.
Thanks so much, Arthur. Carolina, what's your perspective on this?
Yes, thank you. Well, precisely the first issue that we have identified is who pays for the implied costs of traceability. And this is also adding to Deepak's point. In Colombia, we have 540,000 coffee growers. 96% of them have less than 5 hectares. And over 50% of them have less than 1 hectare. Therefore, we have dozens of coffee growers producing coffee for only 1 container. If you compare that to the 14 million bags that Colombia produces, that's a huge work. And in that sense, let's not think really about the costs. And to Arthur's a very important argument, let's think about the power of amplifying value thanks to those technologies. So creating value along the supply chain all the way to the consumer. Why? Because the goal for us is not really the technology. The goal is how to use this technology to generate that value. We have big data, Internet of Things, blockchain, smart agriculture. All these technologies can allow us to make it to the consumer for an argument about how important it is to have this data and this technology so that it's not only a cup of coffee they are drinking, but it's the effort in terms of sustainability, environmental protection, all the things that entail a cup of coffee furthermore. And then the second point is how does information and the communication flow? And that's also a key issue for us as coffee growers, because sometimes we require to gather data from the farmers all the way through the supply chain until it is exported, but sometimes we don't know where the coffee went, and there isn't equality in the communication lines. For us, it is important in the same sense I mentioned about connection and human connection, so that the communication is both ways. To sustainable harvest argument from the SCTA, we need a more circular way of communication. And in that sense, I wanted to present to you one example with a project, a sustainability project with Lovebergs of young coffee growers in Antioquia. And this is like one of the, some special classes. They launched a brand, and every time they visit Colombia and they visit the region, they bring the brand. It has the face of the coffee farmers that were the beneficiary in the program. That's that circular communication, which is so important when you build that traceability, and that also builds trust and builds that sense of belonging for the coffee growers to continue doing a good job. Back to you, Tomoko. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the point about the circularity, and again about putting the people at the forefront. Matthew, I'd like to hear your viewpoint.
Thank you, Tomoko. And I appreciate all of the perspectives that the panelists are bringing. it's interesting sitting up here. I had sort of my talking points, but as I'm listening to the conversation, other ideas just really start to pop up, and I think that speaks to the importance of the discussion. But I think if we look at where some of the challenges are coming from, the coffee supply chain is a very hourglass shaped sort of supply chain where we have millions of producers on the field level who are picking coffee every day, who are putting together several bags of cherry and bringing them to a buying station or bringing them to a cooperative. And there's varying levels of technology available at any of those points of transfer. And so I think the real challenge is in those early stages of the supply chain. I think Louis was talking about it as well a little bit earlier. As coffee moves through the supply chain, I think it gets a little bit easier to maintain the integrity of the data. But the real challenge is at the field level, I think. And that brings me to another point, which I think is where a lot of times some of these programs really falter and fail, is that they're often created from the perspective of the consumer and what it is that the consumer needs or requires, and then that sort of gets pushed down the supply chain. I think where we need to really be considering and thinking about is how do we build that from the field level up. The producers, I think, are some of the most vulnerable members of the supply chain. And they're also the ones that tend to have the least access to some of the technologies that are required for a digital traceability system or transparency system to really be effective. And so it is the programs that I think that are focused on starting from the field level and thinking about how do we do this from the farm and from the producer up, which are going to be the ones that are successful and can really be the most impactful. I hope that we as an industry start to move away from this consumer-driven sort of mentality of how we need to do things and really shift to a producer level and say, how can we do this for the producers, for the most vulnerable in the supply chain, and support them and build a really strong foundation from that perspective.
Thanks, Matthew. If I was going to sum up our very diverse responses to this particular question about what are the key challenges of building a digital traceability system, I think our speakers have brought in various viewpoints. The first one, of course, is taking a look at where in the system is it most vulnerable? Is there the most challenges? We've heard from Matthew about the producers from the field up. At the same time, we've also, Carolina has also mentioned about who's paying for this, and who can we put at the forefront of our efforts, and how can we amplify the value of what they're doing. We also had Arthur talking about, we actually had 3 of our respondents. It was Deepak, Arthur, and also Louis, who also emphasized that we also have a fundamental problem about the unit, the data. Arthur talked about data sovereignty. Louis also talked about understanding, what data we're getting and questioning the data that we're getting. And Deepak also had mentioned, again, because the system itself is fragmented, the data that we get from these different systems also poses a challenge. We did also hear some good ideas about solutions. We heard about a data pooling example, but I think what also strikes me most was that we also heard about the importance of collaboration. And so then as we stitch together some of these digital solutions, it is also about making sure that we find the right collaboration. So now this is also, we had an opportunity to ask you, the audience, for some questions you might like to ask our panelists. And thank you, first of all, thank you so much for sending in your questions. With the limited time we have, we may be able to get to maybe 2, maybe 3 of these questions. So the first question I would like to kick off for our panelists is actually a more specific question. So how does blockchain and cryptocurrency technologies figure into this topic of building trust? Deepak, could you get us started off on this topic?
Yeah, sure, Tomoko. I think there's a lot of interest in blockchain, and I would say it's around key areas of transparency and integrity. I think blockchain does provide immutability of information across the value chain, and there is a lot of interest in the industry around smart contracts, trade finance, delivery of information across the supply chain. Potentially benefits are immense, right to the customers, suppliers, financiers, and also down to the growers themselves. However, like I had mentioned earlier, I think due to the nature of our fragmented supply chain, due to the nature of our smallholder growers, and the lack of technology at the farm gate, it is extremely challenging to implement it right down to the lowest aggregation point. And therefore, the question around the integrity of data comes into the picture. And like Louise was mentioning earlier, in a blockchain system, if the data is incorrect, it remains incorrect throughout the life cycle of that transaction or of that data. So at OFI, we have been exploring blockchain for a while now, and we are looking at opportunities to see how we can use it at scale. There are a lot of small projects underway within the coffee industry using blockchain technology, and it probably is a little bit of a while before this can really become and start impacting this whole notion of trust within our supply chain. Thanks.
Okay. Carolina, what's your perspective on this?
Exactly. We are very fond indeed of blockchain. Actually, a few months ago, together with Farmer Connect, which is a platform of blockchain generated by Sucafina, we were able to launch a new brand with Hema, which is a supermarket chain in the Netherlands, and they also have over 200 outlets in Europe. And Bol Café was also involved to supply 100% Colombian coffee, Rainforest Alliance, and it has been a fantastic experience to bring that coffee directly to the consumers with this new technology in terms of blockchain, and we hope to continue seeing that. We see the interest in the supermarket, the traceability, the legislation in the European Union is going towards due diligence and being able to trace back where the products are coming from, and therefore those technologies are quite important for us. In that sense, cryptocurrency, of course, the digital wallets, being able to, for a coffee farmer to receive instantaneously the payment for his effort, the prosperity income, that would be also a fantastic solution. And in that sense, we also wanted to bring to your attention, we have a system, and it has been implemented for over 15 years in Colombia, called the Coffee Growers Smart ID. What is it? It is an ID that allows them not only to vote on democratic elections every 4 years for their coffee representatives at the municipality and departmental level, but they can also get paid through that Coffee Growers Smart ID. To give you an example, if we have a donor for a project that wants to transfer to the coffee farmer resources that to be used specifically for fertilizers, we're able to channel those resources directly so that they can only spend them at the purchasing point for fertilizers. That is an efficient allocation of resources using technologies and financial technologies to bring that to the coffee growers. And therefore, going forward, we believe that is where the future will be, and that would be a perfect solution also for the coffee growers to continue connecting to the financial international market and to the consumers themselves. Adding precisely the Thank My Farmer, which is something linked precisely to the Farmer Connect, in which, let's say, a consumer is drinking a delicious cup of Colombian coffee and would like to send a tip to his farmer, that would be possible, or would like to donate to a specific program of sustainability around the world, that's also possible. Back to you, Tomoko.
Thank you. Louis, I'd like to get your perspective on this as you're working with technologies itself.
Yeah, I have a strong opinion. So we piloted blockchain technology, and currently our status is it's not a mature technology. First, the proof of work concept is based on carbon emission. The more you emit carbon by using power and processor, the more safe is your transaction. So that's like the Bitcoin is based on proof of work, and some blockchain are based on proof of work. That will doom humanity. This is the end of the world if every transaction goes on the Bitcoin type of proof of work blockchain. But this is out of question. We're a B Corp, we're here to lower carbon emission, not to increase, and remove energy from poor people that need it. So this Bitcoin, get it out of the way. Don't think about that. It's useful for hacker, organized crime, drug dealer, but it's not useful for humanity. So the cryptocurrency will end up being managed by government. Otherwise, it's going to be a big mess and it's going to be open for fraud. I believe in it, and I think we'll see more and more countries emitting cryptocurrency, but not based on blockchain proof of work. It'll be, a centralized system. But that, yes, have a huge potential to ease financial system. But in Africa, it's almost like this. People are used to pay with phone and etc. because they are early adopter of technology. And then for blockchain for traceability, give it a couple of years. I know Ethereum is working to improve the proof of stake, which is a lower carbon emission, simplify and faster, but it's not ready yet. But I think it will be very useful to secure the immutability of data, but not to secure the capture of data. This is still being done by capturing data from cell phone, from a standard platform, with auditing it, but then send it in the blockchain. But I don't think we should start from there. Start by capturing, understanding the supply chain, and then maybe in 2-3 years, then we just push that in this blockchain database. But I don't think it's the essence now to solve the problem. The problem is how to capture the right data. What data? How do we make sure it's reliable data? And then we take care of immutability later.
Okay, thank you. We received, so I think we have some diverse perspectives here on the topic of blockchain and how does it figure into building trust. I think what I heard here from the panelists was that it's still a technology that needs to be proven. The challenge, of course, is to using it for scale. But of course, as Caroline had mentioned, cryptocurrency as well is being used. There are different pilots being there as well. But there's a system problem still that needs to be resolved in order for it to work fully. So with that, we've talked also a lot about digital traceability technologies, such as blockchain and cryptocurrency. I think the question really is, who will benefit most from these digital traceability technologies? With that, I'd like to kick it off with Arthur and hear what he has to say on this topic.
Thank you. There's across the supply chain, across the value chain, technology has proven to be an incredible enabler to make things more efficient. Obviously, shine an incredible light of transparency, make and compromise, and make any sort of corruption and so on, really highlighted and more difficult. But at the core of it all, and at a personal level for me, is the ability for it to really enhance what every one of us on this panel's probably most valuable asset is really empower identity, producer's identity. Identity is an essential characteristic of any specialty grade system, which is really opposite to the anonymity of a commodity system. Among its peers, identity is the first prerequisite to an incentive-based system that rewards quality. Identity and traceability help producer groups build a name in the global marketplace. Identity defines and links a producer to a product. And identity rewards those producers who are fighting the sustainability claims game and gaining traction with it. identity links a product to a producer, as I said, but it also determines the lineage and creates a ledger based on that transaction, thereby empowering the producer to leverage that identity when, in the case of seeking a loan from a bank. This historical ledger, once linked to the producer, is that gift that keeps on giving. And so when I think of who will benefit most from digital traceability, hands down, the producer. At the end of the day as well, we talked about blockchain and the platform and cryptocurrency, but Luis brought up an interesting point about the ubiquity of mobile and the evolution of fintech and how money is exchanged right now. In the smallest and most remote places of the world, they've actually been exchanging money mobile to mobile before a lot of developed countries, and that tidal wave has allowed the benefit of digital traceability to impact producers even further. The trick here is to make sure that we can maintain the link of the identity of the producer to the product and make it uncompromised throughout the value chain. Thereby maintaining the integrity of that identity will only empower the producer's true value and that asset of their identity to continue to be enhanced. So yes, like I said, multiple players and actors will benefit from digital traceability, but hands down, the biggest impact will be to the producer.
Great. Matthew, what's your perspective on who benefits?
Thank you, Tomoko, and thank you, Arthur. I always appreciate having these conversations or similar conversations with Arthur, because I have a great appreciation for his perspective, and sometimes I find myself seeing things quite differently. And so I agree. I think there are multiple players along the supply chain that will benefit from these technologies, and I do also agree. I think it's clear that some of the necessary technologies have been adopted earlier at the farm level through mobile payments and mobile money. But I think the way it stands today, again, I feel like a lot of these traceability initiatives really end up going towards benefiting the consumer, the end user of the product, because it gives us that ability to feel good about the purchase that we're making. And I think that there is a lot more potential for the bigger benefit to be for the producers. But I feel like in today's market, with the technologies that we have and the programs that are in place, it's generally benefiting the end consumer, because again, it gives them the ability, as whether we go to the grocery store shelf or whether we're going to the cafe and getting our single origin espresso, it helps us to feel good about knowing where our coffee is coming from and feeling like we're connected to a strong, transparent supply chain. But I think that where there's the most room for improvement and growth and where it can have the most impact is, again, with the producer. When we build that program from the producer perspective up, as opposed to sort of the inverse, where we're thinking about it from an end user marketing perspective. So, I agree with Arthur to a certain extent, but I also think in the moment, in today, the end user is benefiting the most from it at the moment.
Thank you. So I think we actually have two quite diverse responses on that question about the reality of right now versus actually perhaps what might be in the future, which I thought was very interesting. With that, I'd actually, since we have a couple of minutes left, I'm going to throw out a wildcard question to our speakers here in the remaining time we have left. I'd like to ask each of our speakers to think about this question about building trust through digital technologies Is there one last point that you'd like to emphasize to our audience about this topic about building trust through digital traceability? Or if there's a topic that, or if there's a point that we haven't yet covered that you might like to emphasize here, I'm going to give you some time to think about that. And you'll have perhaps just about 1.5 minutes to provide an answer. It's a big challenge. So let's see, who would like to go first? I am looking at, oh, we have a lot of active people. So actually, let's go with ladies first. Carolina, you're on.
Thank you, Tomoko. Well, precisely the juncture that the whole planet is going through has to be a starting point, not only for the coffee supply chain, but for everyone. We have discovered we're more integrated than ever. This is no longer the butterfly effect, but it's the container effect. One container stock in Haifa might mean that I'm not being able to ship the coffee from dozens of farmers to the destination to my roaster. And it has been coined also as container gather. So I do believe that this instant economics we have to learn from what is going on now to prevent it from happening in the future. And not only think about the coffee supply chain, but a more integrated perspective of all the sectors that would allow us to think forward. What is going on? There is a concentration in producers of fertilizers. There has been a concentration of producers of coffee from around the world. There is a concentration of shipping lines. There is a small availability of free containers. There is concentration in traders, and there is also concentration in roasters. Therefore, we do need to diversify. We do need to think about it more long term, and maybe not only have meetings of the coffee industry, but together in the sense of bringing in also shipping lines, bringing in supermarkets, trying to avoid disruptions going forward. Thank you, Tomoko.
Arthur, I saw you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. You know, we didn't talk, well, we talked about traceability quite a bit. And I know that there's an interconnectedness to the world of sustainability and how those two live side by side or interconnect. But you know, if sustainability is our backbone, and we've put a lot of effort to help us stand upright and firm, I truly believe traceability is then our nervous system. And while sustainability continues to be a challenge, we've come to realize that there is no finish line, nor should we be in a race for that matter. The marathon and the journey is unpredictable, and as long as climate change is with us. So yes, I truly believe that traceability is a key component, and to some companies a prerequisite to inform, refine, and further enhance sustainability claims. You know, Matt talked about consumer benefit, and I quickly thought about, you know, those sustainability claims that also enhance the consumer's experience when they do feel good about the contribution they're making or the choices they're making in their purchases. So there's a new wave of collective adoption towards sustainability goals, where shared challenges and goals are pairing up with collaborative innovations and collective experiences. So we're in an exciting time for integrating traceability into this vortex of common knowledge. So it is this behavioral undercurrent that I believe is the initial recipient of the value of traceability, both to farmers and customers. And if we dedicate more informed decisions, that in turn will impact businesses to change the fulcrum of sustainability. They will further be equipped with rich granular data, and in turn, they will empower smallholder farmers, reduce waste, it'll curb social inequities, and ultimately it'll give consumers authentic experiences through the products they consume. So I would definitely love to hear more about, you know, the connective tissue between sustainability and traceability next time. But thank you. Back to you.
Okay, thanks. Let's have Deepak.
Yeah, thanks, Tomoko. A very interesting question. I think one of the key challenges that we face is essentially around sustainability of our supply chains. And therefore, the fact that today 70% or thereabouts of our coffee comes from two producing countries really puts a lot of pressure on our supply chains if something goes wrong in either one of these two countries. Therefore, using some of these things that we talked about in terms of empowering smallholder growers and therefore providing solutions to them that allow them to produce better, that improve their livelihoods, is a critical element in diversifying the sources of supply that we have today. And that, in my view, is one of the critical elements of ensuring the long-term sustainability of our coffee industry. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to have Matthew chime in here as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Tomoko. I think the correlation between transparency and sustainability is quite clear for folks in the industry to really be able to understand. There is no true sustainability in the coffee industry if there is not economic sustainability. And I think if we look at some of the places where transparency and traceability has really been implemented as sort of been core to the industries, I think we'll see places where producers tend to be more financially rewarded or financially stable. So I think that the two of these things kind of go hand in hand when we do have a traceable supply chain and a transparent supply chain. That those are two fundamental pieces to building a sustainable industry, because again, at the core of any sustainability initiative, we need to have an understanding that there needs to be economic sustainability. Farming is a business, and our smallholder producers are running their farms and need to be running their farms as a business. And so until we're able to really ensure that through things like traceability and transparency, I don't know that we will reach a true sustainable, fully sustainable industry.
And Louis, how about you?
So in the transforming moment that we discussed at the beginning, we try to define, okay, when will we achieve this objective to build a sustainable world? And one key element was the number of legislation that will happen around the world, either on free trade agreement, on local government. How many regulation will they be to control this? So I think that will be the ultimate trust, and prepared traceability platform will help you being able to comply with local government or free trade agreement. We're seeing those legislation coming in Germany and Scandinavia, no deforestation, etc. So the world will be accelerating. Government will ensure that they can trust their supplier and they can trust their supplier from the outside, but also they will protect their industry, forcing them to be transparent to make sure that they don't impact the economic and the GDP of a country. So it's going to be an important milestone to build trust, because it's too easy for brand to do greenwashing. They'll put millions in doing greenwashing. The ultimate trust is government will come with regulation. Free trade agreement will come with regulation. Well, you'll need to show transparency.
Thanks so much, Louis. And I think with that, that actually is a wonderful segue to the next panel that we have, which is on shaping the future of traceability. And I think our five panelists and speakers have done a great job in setting the scene, talking about building trust. We've heard a lot about different perspectives, and thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your perspectives. Okay, with that, we'll head it back. Thank you. And we'll head it back to you. Bye, everybody.
Oh, thank you, Tomoko, for that excellent summing up. Great job, panel one. So some brilliant insights there. So I hope our audience would learn something and have some takeaways. So before we introduce the panel two speakers, we will have a 10-minute intermission. So get your coffee refill, stretch your legs, and we will be back very shortly. Back in 10.
Discover Optel's true end-to-end traceability, a powerful platform that lets you follow all your physical products throughout their life cycle, from raw materials to the consumer. It connects all your data, creating unprecedented and real-time visibility at every step of the supply chain, and also connects all the players along the way. What sets Optel's traceability platform apart is the granular data it collects, data that you can leverage to make real-time decisions to optimize your business. And as the client, you determine what data is most valuable to you. This granular data also puts you in control when it comes to the crucial issue of ensuring the safety of your products. It even allows you to contribute to the circular economy by ensuring sustainability, helping you reduce waste, recycle packaging, optimize resources, substantiate your claims, and manage the product life cycle from end to end. This is an efficient and user-friendly platform that is also incredibly secure. Your data can either be stored in the cloud or on an unfalsifiable blockchain. It all starts with unique serial numbers that digitize all the pertinent information on your cocoa, milk, sugar, and other ingredients and operations. Optel's aggregation process applies a child-parent relationship to your products and containers, so you know the number of products that has been created from the given lot and how many bars have been placed in a given delivery container. You are now able to precisely manage your inventory, as you always know the exact location and status of all your products. Once your product has reached the consumer, the unique identifier can be scanned to reveal detailed information, such as where the product came from, who produced it, and whether it was produced responsibly. Information your customers want to know. This is achieved through consumer engagement technologies, such as a chatbot, that validate the authenticity of products using Optel's traceability platform. These technologies allow you to connect directly with your customers, obtain valuable market and consumer analytics, and monitor the success of your marketing campaigns. The authentication process helps guard against fraud, counterfeiting, and other issues that can harm your brand and impact consumer trust, all through the power of Optel's true end-to-end traceability. Optel, traceability technologies for a better world.
Whenever I'm walking in the coffee farms, I feel like I'm in paradise. I love nature, I love the green areas, and we have this because of coffee farms. That's the only forest cover that we have in the country, and that forest is protected because of the coffee. The first coffee beans originated here in Ethiopia. And we have the largest population of smallholder coffee farmers in the world. Coffee is part of our life. Every family at least will have coffee once a day. It's a way of coming together. The areas where farmers are producing coffee are very scattered. Most of them live where there is no road, there is no electricity. These farmers have probably produced the best coffee. We want to communicate to the world that the coffee which is being produced is produced in a sustainable way and benefiting the society which is producing the coffee.
Consumers want to know where their coffee came from, that there's no deforestation or forced labor during production. But sustainability audits cost thousands of dollars. That's more than a smallholder farmer earns in a year.
We conduct our surveys using local language so that we will be able to communicate with the farmers. Our data collectors ask them about the kind of coffee production practice that they have and provide producers with free verification of their sustainability practices.
Before we started, less than 10% of the coffee world had been verified. We visited 100,000 sites, representing about 1/3 of the entire global coffee farm population.
Coffee is our identity, and at the end of the day, it's the combination of this technology and the human connection that helps make sure that farmers benefit from the coffee that they have produced. We've got to believe in solutions that can help the world.
Welcome back, everyone. So let's go to our panel 2. Panel 2 will be moderated by Dr. Sarah Tischer, who has been in the Newman Coffee Group since 2016. She has built up the group-wide compliance management system with an emphasis on knowledge sharing through training, risk analysis, due diligence, and complaints mechanism. Now, Dr. Sarah will obviously introduce all the panelists and ask them to say hello. So over to you, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you, Joseph, for the introduction and the opportunity to moderate this very interesting panel. Over the next hour, we will take a closer look at how digital traceability has evolved in the coffee industry and the direction it could potentially take. Before we get started, I would like to welcome and introduce our 4 experts and panelists. Callum Emanuel, she is Chief Impact Officer at Sustainable Harvest. Hi, Callum. Our second guest is Cohen Snyers, consultant at Impact Lines. Hi, Cohen.
Hi, hello from Uganda.
Also with us is Stephen Vick, Procurement and Quality Manager at African Coffee Roasters. Hi, Stephen. And last but not least, Darren Daniel. He is Executive Director at the Alliance for Coffee Excellence. Hi, Darren.
Hello, hi from Peru.
Thank you all for being here with us and sharing your knowledge. Digital traceability within the coffee industry has become a very important but also very challenging complex topic. What it actually means can differ substantially depending with whom you are talking, and it has also evolved over time. You have all been dealing with traceability for some time and how this can be put into practice. How has the topic developed over time, and where do we stand right now? Maybe, Darren, you could start and share your view on this with us.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Tischer, and for everyone that's involved in this project. And Joseph, I just want to thank you all for the invitation. And I, earlier we were chatting about the fact that, what were the antecedents, what started this kind of digital revolution, I guess, in terms of transparency. And as an example, with the Cup of Excellence, we started many years ago a auction platform, and that platform has, led to many relationships and a direct trade model, a bridge model, and I think the earlier aspects of this kind of sustainable model that we're all looking at and linkage comes from a desire to actually affect change, to create change based out of a problem in the supply chain model, a problem we're still faced with right now currently. And yet technology and the digital platforms that are emerging are there to assist and help and hopefully innovate what's going on. And I think in the early, let's say early days of especially coffee, which is where I come from, there was always this thirst and hunger for knowledge and information. And I think that's exactly where we're at now, is that we're continuing that conversation for knowledge and visibility. I talk about visibility for all of the stakeholders that are involved in the coffee supply chain. And I think that this is where a lot of this conversation is going, is the visibility of all of the actors, especially the producers, because that is the most important part of this entire topic. And it is the conversation probably of our time in terms of transparency. So, yeah.
Thank you, Darren. Cohen, what's your view on this?
Well, I like to start with where are we coming from in the setting of Uganda. Especially the Rwenzori region, which has been considered as the Wild West of coffee for so many decades, very opaque chains where no information whatsoever is made available towards end consumers, and whereby intermediaries very often have opposed interests in the chain. Just to give an example, between the farm and the exporter, you typically have 5 or 6 intermediaries. And while some of them add value, quite a bunch of them actually just try to, let's call a spade, try to screw each other over by playing dirty games and trying to make margins by, for example, adding external materials into the coffee, right? And the problem with that is that any ambition to make a supply chain more traceable is received with extreme skepticism. Imagine that you yourself go to your favorite coffee cafe and you ask the barista how much his inputs cost and how much he's selling them and what margin he makes in between. This is a very confronting question, but this is exactly the kind of questions we are asking to our intermediaries in the coffee chain when we want to make our supply chain transparent and traceable, and when we want them to disclose farm gate prices paid, right? So from that perspective, it's so important to approach these ambitions of making change more transparent very cautiously. So what are some of the lessons learned here in Uganda to do so? Well, first of all, to start small. Don't expect immediate success, and try to build your relationship with these few intermediaries who have similar values at heart as yourself, and let them use them as an example to others to showcase as a success story, and by providing them with the necessary incentives also to participate in your transparent supply chain. First small and then gradually scaling up over time and increasing your targets. A very slow process to execute this practically on the ground.
Thank you, Cohen. Callum, I would love to hear your perspective.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Tischer, and thank you to Joseph and my fellow panelists. It's been a very insightful experience to bring this to fruition today. I think building on what Cohen said, Sustainable Harvest was started in 1997 in an effort and recognition that, in fact, the linear model of trading coffee was very opaque, did not provide farmers with access to information that they need to fully participate and receive a fair value for their product, for the coffee that they bring to market. And so Relationship Coffee was brought to life. Dave Griswold, the founder of Sustainable Harvest, brought this to life to create a relationship ecosystem that not only provided information back to farmers about what was important for their coffee as it moved throughout the value chain and how they might get there, but to build the partnerships with roasters and other actors in the coffee supply chain to make it possible to achieve those insights and to address the problems that come about in a linear, opaque system. And so, tying to what Cohen had flagged about relationships and specifically how Relationship Coffee was brought to life was, with transparency and traceability being that fundamental basis, right? Forming transparent buyer-seller relationships where there can be a mutual exchange of information in pursuit of problem solving and addressing opportunities for significant improvements, especially for those in most need. And so I think to build on what's been shared so far, I would add that when transparency and traceability are implemented with full awareness of the problem to be solved and designed in a way that is accessible, then we're really getting somewhere. And so from the perspective that I've seen at Sustainable Harvest and in other roles in the coffee value chain, it's really being fully aware of what that problem is, recognizing that transparency and traceability are a significant part of the toolkit to address that problem, and then making sure that as those systems are designed, they're ever mindful of the problem and minimizing the burden to access those systems and solve the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Callum. Stephen, what's your view on this? You're still muted.
I got it. Again, thanks everyone for having me. Thank you to my fellow panelists and Joseph for the invitation, for sure. I worked in a lot of different corners of the industry. Started as a barista and now work roasting coffee at Origin and working on a number of projects at Origin. And I mean, I think if we talk specifically about traceability systems and the experiences I've had, is that there's a lot of systems out there. Even Kellen was just speaking, the RITS, Relationship Information Technology System, which was built for their supply chain. And a lot of systems have been built around a particular value chain, whether it's Cropster for tracking quality and green coffee inventory for roasters, or different verification systems like in Veritas, SupplyShift. And then even I would receive reports before from Interamerican in the US from Eximware, which is a really powerful commodities trading system. And unfortunately, and then all of these have elements of traceability, elements of impact measurement, all of these elements, but none of them are really, it's really hard to get them to talk to each other. I use a whole lot of systems or build my own systems even to get this one system to talk to this system, to talk to this system. And we have a lot of certifications at my company, probably 10 audits a year. And I'm always having to sort of tweak the information I have available to me in my current systems to get what it is I need out for that particular thing. Yeah, so that's kind of where I see things. And obviously the future for me would be for something to be a little bit more integrated and for people to at least be speaking the same language or the same, looking at the same metrics and those sort of things. So yeah, that's about it for me.
Thank you, Stephen. Trying to wrap up what you just stated, and I think it became quite apparent that we face very different stakeholder interests. I think Cohen highlighted that pretty well. So what the smallholder needs is and wants is quite different to what an intermediary or roaster wants. And obviously not everyone wants to share information, which is the overall intention of traceability, right? To share information and make it accessible, something that Callum highlighted. And what I also found really interesting is, apart from that problem, what you just stated, Stephen, that what we are currently seeing with all these different certifications and different approaches, that there are a lot of solutions and systems out there, but how they interrelate is not really addressed yet. Now, there is, in some cases, you might find interrelated systems, but not everywhere. And looking at the solutions, thank you also for sharing some ideas already on that. So what Cohen stated, to start small, use discretion, direct incentives, I think are important aspects. And what the other ones mentioned, again, following up on the different systems, I think that this is really an important aspect. So how can we make sure that different systems in place are integrated? Coming to our next question, as digital traceability becomes more widely discussed within our industry, many are asking whether transparency created by new digital solutions can be an alternative to certificates. This is, I think, an important question to make, as many are feeling the burden that you mentioned, Stephen, of following up on all these different requirements. So maybe, Stephen, you could share your view on this.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the information has to be presentable in a way that's digestible to the consumer and standardized. And again, there's a lot of consumer trust in certifications now, and whether that trust is blind just because it's a good thing to go for, or knowledgeable, it does exist. And I think that the only way that we could get an overall system to sort of replace certifications is that if we were, I can't figure out a way to say this more eloquently, but figure out a way for the consumer to digest what we're tracing, you know, what it is that's out there. Because at the end, at the beginning, you have the farmer, and the end, the consumer, and we can trace all we want for these certifications. But what does the consumer get out of it? Because if they already are a little bit lost as to what these certifications represent, then do we want to create a whole new language if there is already consumer trust in some of these things? So yeah, it's a tricky one, and I don't even know if I think there's a yes or a no, because again, we don't really have a standard language from certification to certification to certification. And already where we're at, while there is consumer trust in these certifications, the actual consumer knowledge of what that certification represents is not necessarily there. from at least what we've seen with our consumers, and I think consumers worldwide.
Thank you, Stephen. Kellen, I would love to hear your perspective.
Sure. From my perspective, what we know that third-party certifications offer is they offer a performance objective. They provide a performance objective. Whether or not the coffee drinker has a full understanding of the full range, that's a separate question that I think it's important to understand and unpack. But we know it's a performance objective. We know it's a process that describes how that performance objective is to be achieved, whether it's organic or minimum price, et cetera. And then the third piece that third-party certifications offer is accountability, right? And I think perhaps I'm not a marketing or a customer expert, but I would offer that it's that accountability that builds customer trust and engagement, even if they don't understand, all of the steps that a coffee takes in a particular certification. So I think understanding those three fundamental elements of certifications when we're considering opportunities to continue to solve problems, right, to address the burdens felt by especially farmers, it's important to be ever mindful of two things. One, time is a non-renewable resource. Right? We know we have an abundance of problems, especially with the urgency and persistence of problems such as, farmers' lack of access to prosperity through coffee livelihoods, as well as the persistent and urgent problem posed by climate change, right? No matter what organization you look to or you trust for your climate-based science, it's very clear that the coffee growing countries are the most vulnerable, right? So time is a non-renewable resource, and we have an incredible amount of urgency. But with that urgency, we have agency, right? And this is something that Michael Mann, a renowned climate scientist, reminds us frequently as he's making us more aware of the impacts of climate change. So we have urgency, but we also have agency. So as we look to dig deeper and identify whether or not transparency, or digital transparency and digital traceability systems can be part of the solution, part of that agency that we implement, it's critical that we're ever mindful of to what end. Right? To what end does making access to information possible to solve problems effectively with urgency and agency, and especially for those groups who are marginalized within those who are marginalized. For example, there's an extreme amount of urgency and deficit for farmers, and even more so for women farmers, for farm laborers and their families as well. So as we evaluate this question, let's build on what we know. We build on what we know is working, and then be ever mindful of to what end as we explore and craft new solutions.
Thank you, Kellen, for this insightful comment. Cohen, do you want to comment as well?
Sure, right. Certifications as alternative. Well, certifications, of course, date back from the 80s, right? Fabulous, innovative concepts those days in order to give assurance about where coffee comes from and how has it been produced and towards what's sustainability standards. And it did it always on a binary approach, right? Whether a coffee was compliant, it passed the certification, or it was non-compliant and it would be sold as ordinary. Now, over the last years, a huge amount of additional sustainability information is being collected from producers. And most of this information is stored in silos within cooperatives or exporters or NGOs. And up to still, the same certification organizations primarily report on a pass-fail, conform or non-conform basis about the characteristics of the produce, which means there is a huge opportunity currently available by passing on information which is in that silo through interoperability along the chain to make sure that this information is ultimately available and can be used by the final consumer. And as long as we overcome the technical challenges of making sure that information can be passed on through traceability software to make, we are able to disclose the real details in terms of sustainability compliance. And that can be both the positives, where there is a pass, but also that could include the failures. Because by disclosing the failures, it allows you to act upon it and address them. And immediately that would overcome the ultimate critique of traditional certification, that it excludes the poorer farmers who don't have the resources to comply with certain benchmarks. So like Stephen said earlier, interoperability between traceability software is still a huge problem, right? And that is in terms of first systems, making those software talk to each other. That's one, but also in terms of content, making sure that we all measure and interpret data in the same way and apply concepts in the same way when we measure them, so it can be passed on. And possibly there's a role still for the same certification organizations there to give some harmonization and standardization on what indicators we have to measure and how are they in a technical way passed on and connected from database to database.
Thank you, Cohen. Darren, you want to add to what your panelists stated?
Yeah, some really interesting points being made by all the panelists, and I think when we look at certification, and coming from a background of working for a larger coffee company in the U.S., which was predominantly one of the largest buyers of organic certified coffee, and then probably by default one of the largest buyers of fair trade coffee in the early stages. What we learned and what I've learned is that certification is a powerful window. It's a powerful opportunity to leverage premiums, to leverage deeper relationships and communication between, let's say, a cooperative group in Peru or other groups within the supply chain, back to a roaster that is interested and cares and definitely wants to share that directly with consumers. What we found in many cases through the history of certification with Whole Foods Market, where I used to work, and was that the identification of certifications became almost like things happened so quickly that there were so many different certifiers, whether it was Rainforest Alliance or 4C or UTZ, or early days before there was some mergers and things that kind of consolidated. What we found is that consumers were a little bit confused because we were all throwing so much information at them that they really could only digest so much of what was being put in front of them. I think we're at a different place now. And also I think we're at a place where consumers are questioning the type of certification and the type of verification, right? And when we look at programs that are focused on environment or social causes or quality, which is kind of where Cup of Excellence comes in, we validate quality and then we usher that through a platform for sales and for visibility and for quality matches relationship, right? So I think that's that we're in a very exciting time where we can actually put a lot of these things together that were really segmented 10, 12, 15 years ago. Now we're at a point where there's a merger or a merging of these types of identified or identifiable platforms. So I think that's the healthy part of it, but we also have to think about how much can a consumer really understand when they're involved in multiple relationships with product, like food and coffee and beverage. And so the more succinct, the more clear, the more really obvious that the mission is around certification or around verification, the better we will all be served in the linkage with all of the different groups that are involved. So I think the better that we can communicate, the clearer we can communicate, we will end up having a larger kind of pull through. You know, consumers will pull through if they understand that the mission is clearly there to not only support producers, but to elevate producers. And if we can't elevate producers, then, you know, we're not moving forward, you know, and I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that, you know, sometimes we share more information than we probably need to because we're trying so hard to be clear, but we end up kind of stepping over ourselves in a way where we don't become clear because we're overshooting the mission in a way. So I hope that makes sense as we kind of bridge over against the other great producers or great presenters. So yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Darren. I think this is a very interesting point you're making. So wrapping up of what you all four just stated, it's not a question of either certifications or digital traceability, but how we can build on the existing knowledge to create, and I think that's something Callum highlighted very well, to create meaningful solutions to solve the urgent problems of our time. So I think you made a very, very important point. We are lacking time and we really need to speed up, you know, and here, I think that's an aspect we mentioned before already. It's all about how we can integrate the different platforms, different approaches. And here, Darren, what you just highlighted, it's integrating that is important to actually make meaningful use of the resources existing, but also to really clearly communicate to the consumers what they are actually buying, what we are actually doing there. So thank you for sharing these very interesting thoughts and perspectives. We have received a number of questions from our participants in advance, and going through these, it became very clear that many are wondering how we can reconcile the various interests of the different stakeholders in the coffee on this topic, aspect Cohen already mentioned. What we currently see are many approaches to drive traceability in the coffee industry. You mentioned a couple of them, but these approaches are not aligned and sometimes even conflicting, leading to increasing complexity, lacking of synergies, and a lot of work. So 10 audits, as Stephen mentioned, per year. My question now, or the question raised by our audience, can we overcome these problems and develop a joint traceability solution supported by different stakeholders? And if yes, how can we do that? Darren, you want to go first?
Can you repeat that question real quick for me, please?
Yeah. Can we overcome these problems? So the increasing complexity due to different systems and due to the different stakeholder interests, and develop a joint traceability solution. Is that something that you think is feasible?
Wow, that's a really, really great question, because it means that all of us would be looking at a consolidation of information and a commitment to a larger platform where we would all have an agreement, just as we have had with other organizations like the ICO, and where there's an international agreement on whether it's subsidies or whether it's information sharing or price sharing. So it does take the larger organizations around the world to commit to that type of fabric, like that type of structure that will allow us to advocate for the whole, for the base. And I want to say that, yes, I believe that internationally, I think that many of the organizations that are committed to coffee would openly be willing to fashion something that would be such as what that question or the questioner is saying. but I also know that it would become a very challenging operation to be able to execute something on that level. But I think we don't really have a choice. We really do need to come to that type of an agreement as it pertains to coffee, especially with challenges around climate and other issues around price discovery. It would be in our best interest as an industry to say we have to find a way. We have to find a path. This is the only way to actually secure supply chain. So, yeah.
Thank you, Darren. Cohen, I would love to hear what you think.
Right. How to use a multi-stakeholder approach to address these issues. There are a few aspects to it. First of all, traceability solution often acts as a black box. Many of the multinational companies have been building their own software. This is all privately owned. Good enough, there are a bunch of smaller private software firms also developing theirs, but only very few of them use open source code to give others access to how the analytics within the software really function. Without that, it becomes impossible to let external stakeholders scrutinize the analytical part in the chain of custody and act as third-party actors towards verification. That is one point I would like to highlight. A second important one is the difficulty we have currently in the origin with a unique identification of the farmers. So many of these farmers, they are part of multiple outgrower schemes with both cooperatives, both multinational coffee buyers, and they might get registered in each, even get certified under each. Now, the first problem you will have is when that farmer gives you 100% of his available coffee in each of those schemes over and over, then already automatically that's a non-traceable coffee because he has likely been acting as an intermediary. Hence, you can't make any claims about the real origin of that coffee. The second one is more of an opportunity there. Because we know that farmers are part of so many different supply chains, it becomes very costly to still enroll them and get them certified from a business perspective, right? But maybe we can help each other. What if multiple actors, exporters, could all play a role in providing assurance, in collecting information from farmers across chains, even across commodities? By doing so and by really agreeing on which farmer is who and having that ability to pass on information along the chain, not only in our own direct chains, but even at a higher level, maybe national level, or managed by a certain multi-stakeholder initiative within a certain commodity, multiple actors who might be competitors on the ground are still able to support each other towards the role of assurance and thereby reducing the cost of running their own internal management systems. So gradually, technology will also help us to get closer and cooperate together as competitors. That's what I like to believe in a further vision.
Thank you, Cohen. Callum, I would like to hear what your perspective is.
Thank you. I would add 2 points. One, I think we have to make sure that the extractive nature and tendencies of data collection doesn't get lost in the equation and in the solution finding, right? And in a pursuit of having more information to facilitate problem solving, we have to be mindful of the impact, the time spent, perhaps that it presents for the farmer, right? It can't be an extractive exercise for information without a clear value and without clear engagement, right? Conversation with farmers to say what's missing, right? What don't the next step of your point of engagement in the supply chain, what don't they know that they need to know, right? So I think, number one, I want to make sure that the conversation doesn't lose sight of a very easy tendency for data collection and sharing to be extractive and particularly add to the already significant burden that farmers and their families face. The second point I want to add is make sure to highlight that there are several pre-competitive collaborative efforts happening in the industry. Sustainable, I'm proud to be part of them, representing Sustainable Harvest in them. The effort led by the ICO Public-Private Task Force has, come together for the last several years and identified, okay, here are the clear challenges facing all of us in the industry. How can we come together in a pre-competitive collaborative approach to address those challenges? And information about that is clearly available on the website. And what's especially exciting about that effort is it's bringing together coffee growing countries, coffee importing countries, as well as many industry stakeholders working collaboratively to say, all right, what are the problems? What are the solutions? And what's our roadmap to get there? Other efforts such as the Sustainable Coffee Challenge are digging in and identifying, okay, what are the efforts that we can work on together? What are the individual goal setting that we can encourage members, the commitments of the partners of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge? What are they? Let's share them, right? They're publicly available to identify opportunities to learn from one another, but then also identify common metrics that we can all use in alignment to achieve those goals. So I just, want to make sure, in the spirit of building on what works and working collaboratively to identify and share what doesn't work, those two efforts are really helpful in moving this collective effort forward for the betterment of the industry.
Thank you, Kellen. Stephen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has definitely touched on all the things I wanted to touch on. As Kuhn said, these multinational traders, it's amazing the amount of information they have and the systems they build out. I was in one of the traders' offices, I won't mention whom, a few months ago, and they were showing me this data I had, and I was like, I would pay you $500 a month for this data. I mean, this is incredible, and it's only for the supply chain. So again, as everyone said, openness, willingness to share, but I think also an element of the private industry understanding, the private sort of, not the traders or not the certifications, but other entities who are building out their own systems, like Cropster. And I don't work for Cropster, trust me, I pay them a lot of money per month. But they, have done a lot of understanding what my challenges are as a user and as a roaster, and understanding what things I need to find, what things I need to produce for this audit or that audit, what traceability systems I'm looking. So I also feel like a lot of these systems, similar to Cropster, are getting better and better, and realizing that they have, if they perfect these other parts of the value chain, they're going to be able to build more customers. And I think the private industry also needs to step up a little bit and understand the needs of whoever in the value chain, so they can build these systems to be integrated.
Thank you all. It's a very challenging task. It's good to hear that there are already pre-competitive initiatives out there on which we can build as an industry. I think it's the role of the private industry mentioned by you is very important. So there, as you just stated, Stephen, everyone needs to also have a certain willingness to share information. That's something we need to build on. And it's an important matter to cooperate. I think that became quite apparent from your answers. Last but not least, we have another question raised by one of our participants. When we talk about digital traceability, the topic of cryptocurrencies always comes up. What role will blockchain and other cryptocurrencies play in the future for the coffee industry? Stephen, what do you think about it?
Well, I think two very different things. I mean, I think obviously the future is verifying transactions and getting to a place where we can have verified transactions and true traceability across the supply chain. Here in Kenya, there's a German-Kenyan company called Inside Coffee and they're verifying transactions and for individual actual products. And that's great. And that works here in Kenya because we have a fairly developed mobile banking system here, but that definitely doesn't work all over the world. And I think, you know, when we want to talk about cryptocurrency, or that we've already mentioned about how that's, you know, that's such a challenge for coffee farmers who are receiving cash most of the time. Or blockchain, there are so many transactions, as Koen was mentioning in the supply chain, that if you wanted to verify every transaction, every UCDA certificate, every one of these things, you know, the resources required to verify that would be very great. And then if you want to talk about, you know, verification up the supply chain, most farmers are still receiving cash for their coffee cherry. And so if you start at the bottom of the supply chain with something that really can't be verified other than someone punching in, oh yeah, this farmer was paid, you know, 28,614 shillings today in cash, that's not a truly verified transaction. And then all of a sudden we're building the entire supply chain up off of this pseudo verification. And that's a challenge we're definitely going to have to overcome until the vast majority of farmers aren't being paid in cold hard cash. So yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I think a really important point you're making here. Callum, you want to add?
I would just add, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, with any solution, you know, to what end, right? The introduction of blockchain, you know, what challenge is this solving, and where has it worked, and is that challenge present? You know, for example, I'm familiar with the example of how blockchain technology has helped major retailers like Walmart, when there is an outbreak of, you know, some problem, they're able to trace it back to the individual pepper crop and minimize the losses of, you know, getting rid of all peppers until they figure out, you know, the source of the outbreak, et cetera. So I think those are very real challenges where blockchain is an appropriate technology that's proving to address those challenges. And I think as we explore blockchain, it's important to look at, you know, what are the enabling conditions for it to achieve the success that addresses the problem we know it exists. And if you know, the example that Stephen highlights is, you know, I'm not so sure that blockchain may be the most urgent and pressing solution to the challenges, you know, such that Stephen has outlined in Kenya. So I don't have qualified expertise to say yes blockchain, no blockchain. I just default to what end and what burden is introduced by this proposed solution.
Thank you, Callum. Koen, what's your view on this?
Yeah, how do I remain positive about this kind of ideas? In my view, technology is never a magic bullet. It can help us a lot, right? But it will never be the ultimate solution. If your supply chain is not traceable, if your change of custody is not completely covered and can be assured through your internal control systems, then yeah, like mentioned by Stephen, then we're just going to fool each other around with now data no longer just digital, but now also on the blockchain. And all kind of beautiful stories will be built with it, all the way down to the end users and the new generation with their smartphones in Europe and the US will ultimately be deceived, and we will struggle to really address the issues which are still present in the origin, right? Keep in mind, any system you build, even verification systems, or letting the other party confirm transactions, can always be fooled, right? If you don't have buy-in and ownership of all actors along the chain, anyone can push whatever button they are asked to do so, defeating the whole system. So, and that is something I tend to, without sounding too cynical, I tend to see as a gap with many of the traceability software providers, which are currently really focusing on that blockchain solution. They seem to have a bit of a disconnect with the reality in the origin. They might be consisting of extremely bright people, studied amazingly complex subject matters, but understanding how that high-level solution will operate in a very rough and offline and dirty environment as in the mountains between Congo and Uganda, it's really a very far and ambitious shot to pull it off and to avoid disappointments. The only opportunity I see in order to finalize on a positive note is that in East Africa, there is a high integration of mobile money, which still uses mostly analog phones, and whereby the SIM card is connected to a kind of bank account. And that revolution has really made a big difference. East Africa is running ahead of most of the rest of the world in this regard, and possibly this might put them in an advantage position for further integration through a future crypto interconnectivity. That's where I would like to leave it.
Thank you, Cohen. Darren, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think with what's going on with cryptocurrency is another enhanced possibility of hedging. From what I understand, it does provide those buyers to use that currency as a way to advance their interests. Again, that could be something that could be used in a positive way, in an entirely effective way, but it also could be used as a way to game the system. So, I think the question specifically is asking, where does this currency land within coffee purchasing or futures? It doesn't seem, from my understanding, it doesn't seem that much different, other than the valuation of the currency while you're trading whatever you're trading. And this could be highly positive for the coffee industry, or it could be yet another ability to hedge for those that are more equipped to win, and for those that are not equipped to win, they don't win. And so I'm concerned that it may be something that is more utilized by those who have the information and the knowledge to be able to trade in that currency or through crypto. But then again, it might be a tool for sellers, not just buyers, but sellers. And I think that's something that we all are learning in the moment as to what are the benefits, what are the risks, what are the outcomes based on this type of leveraging through alternative currencies outside of just the dollar, outside of what we kind of know to be the standard, standard bearer as to trade. So, yeah. Over.
Thank you, Darren. Wrapping up what you just stated, your comments, well, you all see the role of cryptocurrencies rather critically, taking into consideration how the coffee industry works. You provided very interesting examples, such as the use of a lot of cash, which is, well, conflicting to cryptocurrency, obviously. And I think, again, Callum highlighted again that also it's a fancy term right now. Everyone is like into cryptocurrencies, but even it might be fancy, but why are we implementing certain things? You said to what end, Callum, so I think that's important to keep in mind. Thank you all for sharing your expertise and perspective with us. Thank you to our audience for being here with us. It really was an interesting discussion, which surely needs to be continued. And now back to you, Joseph.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah and panel 2. Well done, everyone. If there's one thing that I have learned from this webinar today, is what Arthur Caroletwa, our panel one speaker, said, that collaboration is the new competition. So we would like to reach out to the ICO and all the stakeholders, that maybe the World Coffee Alliance would be a neutral platform for everyone to collaborate with the leadership of the ICO, of course. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we connect all the dots in terms of traceability. There's got to be inclusion, especially the 250 million coffee holders, small coffee holders. So on that note, I would like to thank everyone who participated in this particular event. And I hope that next year we will have a new format. We've done 3 events this year, but it's going to be something exciting and something that will benefit all. But we hope to see you, hopefully, I hope face-to-face as we get out of this pandemic. I know it's very optimistic view, as there are a lot of differences in terms of the getting out of the lockdown, etc. And we are in the winter here in London, so we don't know what's going to happen. So hopefully we will meet you again at some point in person. And thank you very much to all the panel speakers. Callum, thank you. Cohen, thank you very much. Stephen, who is in Bandung. Darwin, and most especially Dr. Sarah Tischer from NKG, who basically glued together all the perspectives from different stakeholders in the coffee industry. And I find that very reassuring because, as I said, we need to collaborate. Everyone is on the same boat. And we can only achieve this if we answer what Callum has posed, which is up to what end? To what end are we doing this? Why are we here in the coffee industry, first of all? So, ladies and gentlemen, the audience, thank you very much for the submission of your questions in advance. And I'd like to thank also the coffee community and some of the technology companies, especially Optel, who made this event possible. And of course, to our event partners, Inveritas and Sustainable Harvest. Callum, thank you. And I would love to see you all. I've got 44 minutes, and then thank you very much indeed, and have a nice day. Goodbye.